Welcome to Wake Up Canada News. I'm Brad Wilder. We start today talking about Bill C-21. I know, who cares, right? But did you know that this is an act that allows the government to amend certain acts? More BS, right? Well, this is to make certain consequential amendments specifically to firearms here in Canada. The second reading was completed in the Senate back on June 21st, 2023, where Mark Mendicino, recently fired Liberal Minister of Public Safety, stated that this bill is, well, let's let him tell you.
Last spring, our government introduced Bill C-21, Canada's most significant gun control legislation in a generation. This historic bill implements a national freeze on handguns. It takes aim at organized crime and addresses the alarming role of firearms in domestic violence. These are historic steps, and today we're strengthening them. Over the past number of months, we've worked hard to engage Canadians from all walks of life about how we can do more to protect our communities from gun violence. What we're doing with our legislation in Bill C-21 is protecting families. We're protecting our children. We're protecting our communities. We want to do that, yes, because it represents smart and effective and strong gun control legislation, but most importantly, because it will help to save the lives of more Canadians from gun violence. And we owe it to every single person who has lost a loved one, whose loved one has been injured and traumatized, to this scourge on our society to get this done. And that is precisely what we are focused on doing.
Well, that's certainly a lofty, if not impossible, goal. Sort of that pie in the sky, so to speak. It's all about safety and for your protection. Most gun violence in Canada comes from criminals and gangs that have illegally gained possession of guns primarily smuggled into Canada from the USA. Law-abiding gun owners and Canadians are not really the problem, are they? Let's look at some recent history of bills passed in the Senate by the libtards. Bill C-5, Bill C-75, and even Bill C-83. Now, under Bill C-5, the government repealed a number of mandatory sentences for gun crimes, including robbery with a firearm. They reduced mandatory sentencing for gun crimes. Who's causing the problem here? Is it the guns? Is it the people? It's the government. Now, this effectively puts the criminals back on the street after a minimal sentence, doesn't it? Now, under Bill C-75, the government introduced a new legislative principle of restraint for police and the courts to observe when it comes to granting bail. This bill ensures that the release at the earliest opportunity is favored over detention. Now, in British Columbia, 50% of violent criminals with bail breaches on their files are back on the streets quickly. Now, Bill C-83 introduced a principle to the Corrections and Conditional Release Act, mandating that all offenders must be incarcerated at least restricted level of security consistent with public policy. That means as long as these criminals, behave and while incarcerated, they work their way to an early day and then full parole. And while their sentences are reduced to a minimum, they are back on the streets in no time. The Liberals say one thing while doing another. Don't be fooled. Judge them by their actions, not by their words. Words like, it's for your safety. These are nothing more than slogans, folks. These WEF, or World Economic puppets, the Liberal Party have, no intention of keeping you safe, but it certainly seems like they're intent on removing guns and our right of self-protection. Now let's take a look at an article here from Gary Mauser, who is the author of The Federal Government Plans to Confiscate $4 billion worth of private property via gun ban. He wrote the article for the Fraser Institute. Now, fewer guns obviously, according to the government, means safer communities. The Trudeau government has cracked down heavily on Canadian firearm owners. In addition to introducing increasingly restrictive gun regulations, the government has essentially erased the value of more than $4 billion worth of private property, i.e. firearms, by ordering its confiscation. Now, this is the same move as all other communist countries throughout time have made, isn't it? You've heard that before. Property that was legally owned and used now must be forfeited to the government to, purportedly reduce gun violence. But none of the owners have been accused of a violent act. Bill C-21, currently before the Senate, is the most recent move in a multi-year campaign by the Trudeau government to disarm Canadian civilians. In reality, many are simply semi-automatic rifles and shotguns that have been popular with hunters and sports shooters for more than 100 years here in Canada. Amnesty is going to expire in just 2 months, or October of 2023. Canadians must then surrender all of these lawfully owned and used firearms to the government. Guess we'll see about that. A national freeze on handgun sales prohibiting the illegal sale or inheritance of almost all handguns and requiring them to be surrendered without compensation when the owner passes away. The freeze effectively renders approximately 1 million legal firearms valued at more than $1 billion worthless. Now, because of these moves, the Trudeau government has rendered valueless more than $4 billion worth of private property from law-abiding Canadians while simultaneously bankrupting hundreds of small businesses across the country. Because of the ban, more than 4,500 small and medium-sized businesses, which employ more than 40,000 people, are now stuck with large amounts of inventory that are suddenly illegal for them to sell or export. These businesses, they can't absorb these losses, and they need to cut. So where do they cut? Well, they cut jobs or close their doors. Now, the Canadian Sporting Arms and Ammunition Association estimates the economic loss between $900 million and $1.06 billion. Why is the government doing this? Why is it targeting law-abiding firearm owners and business associated with firearms? Well, the most worrying part of the Trudeau government's Bill C-21 are the so-called red flag provisions, which, if implemented, will allow private citizens to ask a judge to issue an order to seize another person's firearms. Not only do these red flag provisions carry great potential for misuse and abuse, they are absolutely unnecessary. So, under the Firearms Act, the Chief Firearms Officer can revoke a firearm license and order firearms confiscated. However, current legislation allows Canadians to appeal revocations and have their firearms returned. Bill C-21 apparently, though, does not. Now, peer-reviewed research shows that previous legislation prohibiting the possession and acquisition of certain firearms made no discernible impact on the rates of homicide, spousal homicide, or suicide in Canada or even other countries. The Trudeau's government crackdown on law-abiding firearm owners will not make Canadians safer, but will confiscate billions of dollars of private property and destroy the entire sector of the economy. Focusing on guns rather than violent criminals lets Ottawa pose as a protector of public safety while doing very little about criminal violence. To actually make Canadians safer, the government should pursue policies that target criminals instead of law-abiding Canadians. This is a snippet from Gary Mauser, author of The Federal Government Plans to Confiscate $4 billion worth of private property via gun bans. You can find a link to Gary's work in our description. Thanks for watching Wake Up Canada News. I'm Brad Wilder. Remember, you're the voice. It's time to make it count. I'll see you next time.